Dr. Karla Turner.
Thank you. Can anybody see me out there? I need a Coke carton, somebody to stand on here. All right, how about sound? Are we okay on that? Well, before we get started, and someday my eyes will actually get used to this and I can see who you are out there, I just want to mention something. I haven't been able to sit in on many of the presentations so far because I've been working out front. And I don't know if anybody has made a big to-do yet over the fact that this is the 7th Ozark UFO Conference. Has everybody already celebrated that and I missed it? Well, this is the 6th one that my husband and I have been to, and I really want to thank Lou Farish for one more excellent weekend, if I survive it, that is. And, Lou really makes it feel very natural and effortless and so easy to be here, but I think Lou would agree with me that that's probably an illusion. I think it takes hours and hours and weeks of work on his part for us to come here like we do every year and listen and share and catch up with all our old friends and, for me at least, meet a lot of new ones. And all the while, we're getting, so much of the recent information in this field from some of the most committed researchers and reporters and investigators out here. Although maybe I shouldn't say committed. Maybe I should say dedicated instead. I don't think any of them have been committed lately, and let's just hope it stays that way. I'll tell you, though, with all the apprehensions, I hate to get serious on Saturday morning, but with all the apprehensions I have heard voiced in the UFO community and other communities over the past year about all the escalating social and political and scientific and religious repression and suspicion and polarization, and even fears of some new incarnation of totalitarianism, though, you sort of have to wonder just how long we're all going to be able to continue to do what we're doing this weekend and to research and report and educate ourselves and others about the real nature of this phenomenon. So let's all take advantage of it while we have the opportunity here. Many of us attend a number of these conferences, and I think we read a lot of the relevant books in the magazines and journals, and we have a great network of friends and connections all over the country, all over the world, in fact, with whom we share information. And I just want to say, no matter what our differing views may be about the ultimate nature of this phenomenon, I think we all must agree we're living in a very exciting world and a very exciting time. We all feel this. The more involved we are in the field, the more deeply we feel this. But the truth is that the rest of the world isn't watching what we're doing. I would remind us all that the UFO community is very small. It's very isolated from mainstream society in a certain way, although we're all out there right in the middle of things individually. And the things that we take for granted, most of society takes for science fiction, or fantasy, or hoax. And they pay very little conscious attention to us. Now, the reality of this phenomenon is not part of their perceptions for the most part, and until it is, I feel that we have a strong obligation to try to do something about that. As an abductee and a family of abductees, I know that it's real, what we're dealing with. As a researcher and a reporter about other people's experiences, I know that it is widespread, and that more and more people every day are becoming aware of just how real and pervasive and globally important this agenda of improbable contact and intrusion must surely be. I think the nature of this phenomenon admonishes all of us to become researchers and reporters, and most of all, educators. The whole world should be watching and listening, don't you think? And we need to do it. That's our job. But instead, right now, as we're meeting here and delving into so many different aspects of this field, most of our friends, our families, our co-workers remain in that blissful state of unawareness. So we all have a job to do. So, it's not all secondhand information that I'm reporting. We do have occasions to witness this ourselves. There's also a number of reports from the women that indicate a variety of illusory scenarios, one of the points I wanted to stress today. Sometimes involving sexual situations, sometimes involving prophetic dreams or visions, and sometimes clearly screened memories of real encounters that left them with false recollections rather than with the real details of these events. I'd like to use my remaining time to discuss the nature of the physical procedures, however, reported by many of these women, and these women are very typical and representative cases for so much of the material reported that never gets to you or to me because it's kept very private and very confidential. Because I think we need to be aware of just how physically oriented so much of the abduction agenda really is. In addition to the bodily effects you're already probably familiar with, including rashes, hair loss, eye problems, nausea, and for women especially gynecological problems and irregularities, the greatest area of concern, in my thinking, is that of the implants, the devices that several of the women, like so many other abductees around the planet, describe as being inserted into their bodies. I think the most intriguing information that I report and taken, and that in fact I've come across in all of this work, has come from Amy's account of this altered state scenario I referred to briefly, where she was taken to an underground installation. She felt this was what she perceived. And I would remind you as I go through this brief presentation that in every encounter, the human's state of consciousness is externally altered and controlled in every encounter. And knowing the virtual reality capabilities and the screen abilities, we need to remember not to take everything as being the gospel truth that people come away remembering. Now this has, however, been explored with some very thorough regression work, and so I do feel a little more confident in what I'm going to tell you about Amy's memory of this event today than I would if it were strictly her conscious recollection. In part of this scenario, Amy recalled going into the underground room, full of equipment, typically described from other alien encounters and other underground facilities, by the way, and seeing quite a large number of alien entities working here in this environment. But as I said earlier, there were also several human-looking men present, at least human-looking except for their eyes. One particular alien in the group that Amy perceived to be a female interacted with her directly. And this female alien began, basically, with an apology to Amy for the intrusions that some of her race were making into human lives. This entity proceeded to explain that she and her group were working with some humans to try to counteract what the rest of her group was doing to us. All right, so we got to get the setup here on what Amy is being told. As the entity explained the negative nature of these intrusions for which she was apologizing, she then told Amy she wanted to remove 2 implants. This is one of the things they were doing to help counteract this negative intrusion activity, was to remove implants that the other group was putting into humans. And Amy recalled having an implant removed from one of her ears, and another smaller metallic implant removed from the base of her neck, or skull. Amy was told by the aliens several things about how these implants functioned, and she reports that she was not happy to hear that they could be used to control the implanted abductees in any number of ways. Now, the area into which the newer implants are inserted, Amy was told, corresponds to the part of the brain known as the reticular formation, and it doesn't have anything to do with zetas, by the way. Thanks to Marianne Friedman, who's here this weekend from Arizona, and who was wonderful enough to share a lot of her research into the medical aspects of this brainstem activity. I want to just briefly refer to this, and then on Sunday morning, Marianne is going to go into a little more detail at one of the mini sessions, so I encourage you to listen to this material. The functions of the reticular formation that Marianne got me started looking at are staggering. And I'm sure some of you have been through this already. For me, it was just information I had to recorrelate with the accounts of the implant reports, especially those that Amy had relayed to me from her friendly implant-removing alien. The function of, I'll just read you a very brief statement from Nigel Calder's book, The Mind of Man, one of the earlier classics of our modern time, on brain activity and brain research. And here is a quote about this reticular formation area. If the primary job of the brain is to enable its owner to respond effectively to events, The strongest claimant for mastery is not the roof or the cerebral cortex at all, but the brainstem. The brainstem net is well placed to monitor all the nerves connecting brain and body. It knows what is going on better than any other single part of the brain. The brainstem net exerts its authority by sending out impulses which stimulate or inhibit nerve action throughout the brain and the body. It can override activity in the spinal cord. It regulates the signals from the eyes, the ears, and other sense organs, thereby providing an agency for selecting what is to be attended to from moment to moment. And it is this part of the brain that Amy was told was now the most common area for the newer alien implants to be located. If the aliens are indeed placing control implants into this area, then they would be able, as you've seen from this just very brief description of the brainstem activity, they would be able to control everything from the person's level of consciousness, to the bodily functions, to the memory and thought processes, and the assessment of all sensory input. Now, if you don't think the implications of that kind of control are overwhelming, think again. And I hope Marianne will stimulate some exciting conversations with you tomorrow morning about the possibilities of this area of the brain being the point of alien control through which abductees can be kept awake, put to sleep, put in an altered state, made to get up and do things that they would not choose to do, made to say things they would not say, made to forget things that they have said and done, etc. All sensory input being controlled by this area. Through the implant, any number of realities can be presented to the abductee that are not really there. And what one remembers is controlled through this area, so the repression of memory of these events is very easily controlled as well. I think the implications are staggering. So also, however, are the implications of the final point I want to make this morning, and that is the reports on the cloning of human bodies that I previously encountered with Ted's investigation. In the women of Taken, two of the women, Pat and Lisa, both remember being shown cloned copies of their bodies, just as Ted reported having a cloned copy of his body. But the explanations that Pat and Lisa received from the aliens about these cloned bodies are highly contradictory. As I talk about in the book, Pat, whose alien experiences, now this is the woman who had the 1954 family abduction in Indiana, followed by the military's arrival and sequestering and drugging and so on. Pat had had, throughout her alien encounters, a very religious atmosphere or overtone to these events, instrumented by the aliens. For instance, the first time there on the farm that the family was abducted, when Pat's grandmother began to, what we would say now, freak out and start praying to Jesus for help as these little grays came into the room, a blue beam of light came through the ceiling, just like in Star Trek, and Jesus popped out of it and said, in effect, they're with me, it's okay. And as I'm very fond of saying, and I don't know why I like this so much, except it always gets me, I asked Pat what Jesus looked like, and she said, oh, he was beautiful. He was so awe-inspiring. He was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and just beautiful. And I said, hey, Pat, look back at the New Testament. I don't think that's what Jesus probably looked like, historically speaking. And it went right over Pat's head, and she said, with tears of joy in her eyes, well, this one did. They knew how to push Pat's buttons. She was a very religious person. She was also told essentially that the aliens there with her were angels, and that their job was to prepare new bodies, as mentioned in the Bible, for the coming return of Jesus and the resurrection. When Jesus comes down with the legion of spacecraft to carry out this changeover, it was the aliens who are in charge of providing those new bodies. You want to see yours, Pat, they said? So this was wonderful. Pat is now assured that when the resurrection comes, she's got the vehicle for it. Lisa, on the other hand, down in Alabama, was told that the cloned copy of her body could be used in a very threatening manner. In effect, that it could be used to replace her if she didn't cooperate with the alien program, and that no one would know the difference. Not quite the same story as the resurrection. I would point out that such an implication of threat and replacement was also made to Ted Rice during an abduction when he was a young teenager, and there were several other teenagers abducted with him at that time, and cloned replacement threats were made also at that point. So these are the 3 points that I really wanted to make briefly this morning before I do the presentation of the video with illustrations from the women in Taken. And like a good English teacher, I'm supposed to summarize what I've said, and I'm going to do that right now. For you to consider 3 points, hopefully. First, our own human authorities are seriously concerned about and involved with some aspects of the alien abduction agenda. If they take it seriously, it would behoove us to do likewise. And also, when human agencies are involved, there has to be some sort of trail of events. And I think thus a very strong possibility exists for some intrepid researchers to get out there and uncover and follow this trail. There has to be a record of human involvement. Second, much of this agenda clearly has a physical focus that should raise some very strong questions about some of the alien claims to be here on a primarily spiritual mission. The implication of both the implants and the reports of the cloned bodies are so potentially explosive that a great deal of effort toward investigating these allegations is certainly called for if we're really serious about wanting to understand the motivations of these entities and the purposes of their contacts with us. And third, I think we need to recognize that deceptions are employed at almost every level of this interaction to keep abductees from knowing about the actual events and the actual entities involved in these encounters. To me, maybe I'm just a suspicious sort, this implies that there's something they don't want us to know about. And often what seems implied from the reports is that there is something within us, the humans, something of which we could be capable, something of resistance or altering of this scenario that the abductors absolutely do not want us to be aware of. They go to great lengths to program our thinking about our encounters with them, that we are subordinate, that we are helpless, or that we are dependent, or that we belong to them. The list goes on. And they go to a great deal of trouble to convince us in every way that they can that we can do nothing about controlling these situations. The good news is that in a number of cases in the past couple of years, that hasn't proven to be true. Abductees are finding more and more specific instances in which they are able to resist the illusion suggestions, in which they are able to say no to procedures, and in fact when they have been able to break free of actual controls. This to me is a great step forward, and I think it's going to be something growing with any luck. We're going to find abductees are realizing there are ways to change this entire pattern of activity.
I'm going to tell you about a revelation that will forever change the way you view the extraterrestrial phenomenon. Dr. Karla Turner, a courageous researcher who dedicated her life to studying alien abductions, discovered something that goes beyond any known theory. Her findings reveal that these beings not only manipulate our bodies and minds, but have a deep and disturbing interest in something much more sacred, the human soul. Through documented cases and chilling testimonies, we will explore how these entities create virtual realities, implant false memories, perform pain experiments, clone human bodies, and most disturbing of all, seem to capture and recycle the souls of their victims. Prepare to learn a truth that challenges everything you thought you knew. Dr. Karla Turner was no ordinary person talking about aliens. She was a university professor with a solid academic background who was forced to investigate this phenomenon when she and her family began experiencing abductions between 1988 and 1996, when she died of cancer after being threatened because of her work. He was just 48 years old. Since then, several other people involved in UFO research have also suffered threats, followed by very unusual cancers. Several of his case studies were suppressed and hidden. Turner wrote 3 groundbreaking books that changed the way we understand extraterrestrial encounters. His works Into the Fringe, Taken, and Masquerade of Angels documented not only his own experiences, but those of dozens of others who had experienced similar situations. Turner discovered that these encounters were not isolated or benevolent events, as many believed, but part of something much more sinister and organized that profoundly affected the lives of the victims. One of Turner's most disturbing discoveries was that extraterrestrials are masters of deception. During his 1995 lecture at the MUFON convention, he revealed cases where these entities made false predictions that destroyed lives. The case of James, a brilliant young man, is especially shocking. An interdimensional entity gave him truthful information about distant events to gain his trust, but then lied to him about his future, telling him that in 5 years he would lose control of his life. This lie completely destroyed his promising future. He dropped out of college, his career plans, and his relationships, dedicating himself solely to enjoying his last years of freedom. 5 years later, none of what was predicted happened, but his life was already ruined forever. Turner discovered that these beings have absolute control over human perception during encounters. Not only can they manipulate what we see, but also our memories and deepest emotions. They can control pain, sexual pleasure, and implant completely false memories of real events. Joy's case illustrates this extreme manipulation. She recalled a beautiful spiritual experience reading messages to smiling extraterrestrials in a classroom, feeling love and acceptance. But under hypnosis, the terrible truth was revealed. She was naked, suspended in a beam of light, being subjected to medical examinations and sexual abuse while crying out to God for help. This trauma affected his faith, sexuality, and emotional well-being for 20 years, although he had no conscious recollection of the actual event. The physical procedures performed by these entities go far beyond any hybridization program. Turner documented the insertion of implants into the brains, ears, necks, spines, hips, and even the genitals of victims. Some implants are detectable by X-rays and MRIs. Others remain invisible. Additionally, they insert wires and tubes into the breasts, kidneys, ovaries, knees, and feet. They perform brain surgeries where abductees feel as if their heads are being opened up and their brains removed. But most chilling are the deliberate pain experiments, where they torture victims simply to study their reactions or possibly for simple amusement. These procedures suggest goals that go far beyond any known scientific or reproductive interest. Cloning is another terrifying aspect of the phenomenon that Turner researched extensively. He did not refer simply to the mass production of gray workers, but to the cloning of entire human bodies. Abductees frequently see exact copies of themselves or rooms filled with identical human bodies. In one documented case, a man was taken to a place where he saw 40 bodies, 20 exactly the same men and 20 exactly the same women, all young, blonde, and apparently healthy. Turner constantly questioned the relationship between this mass production of bodies and the real goals of extraterrestrials. Why do they need so many identical human bodies? The answer, as we will see, has to do with their interest in human souls and the possibility of transferring consciousness between different physical vessels. Turner also revealed the ability of these entities to create completely convincing virtual realities. The case of Ted Rise in Florida is particularly illustrative. One night, Ted heard his hostess Marie screaming for help. Running into the room, he saw a glowing blue sphere surrounding the bed where Frances lay. Another guest. Frances was paralyzed, but conversing with beings that no one else could see. She described how the ceiling dissolved, revealing an alien ship from which two beings, Ted and Marie, descended to communicate with her. Outside the sphere of energy, all they could see was a blue light. If they had not been there as witnesses, Frances would have believed that she had had a completely real encounter. This case demonstrated that they can create illusions so perfect that they are indistinguishable from reality. One of the most disturbing aspects that Turner discovered was the direct interest of these entities in the human soul. Although this topic is rarely discussed publicly, many abductees report experiences related to their souls. In one documented case, aliens directly asked a young woman if they could borrow her soul. Other abductees described seeing a huge metal sphere in space that they were told was a soul recycling center. Some recalled past lives in extraterrestrial bodies, and one man specifically recalled seeing his young human body die, his soul captured, and then inserted into a new body using extraterrestrial technology. These testimonies suggest that the real objective may be the capture and manipulation of human consciousness. Turner identified that these entities use sophisticated propaganda to shape human perception of them. They take advantage of their ability to create illusions and virtual realities to present themselves in forms that generate trust and docility. They frequently appear as deceased relatives, celebrities, or religious figures, especially as Jesus with specific features, such as blue eyes and blonde hair. This manipulation exploits the human tendency to associate physical beauty with moral goodness. Turner warned that this strategy is based on manipulating our emotions rather than providing real evidence of their true intentions. By presenting themselves as attractive and familiar beings, they manage to make abductees more cooperative during encounters, thus facilitating their true objectives that remain hidden behind these comforting masks. Long-term psychological programming is another key element that Turner discovered in his research. These entities not only perform physical procedures, but also systematically attack their victims' personal relationships, views on sexuality, political beliefs, and religious ideas. Many abductees develop a deep distrust of the government and paranoia towards other people, both inside and outside the ufological community. Spiritual beliefs also change dramatically after encounters. A woman named Jane, documented in the book Taken, explained how aliens specifically made her distrust the government. This programming appears designed to isolate victims socially and make them more dependent on their captors, creating a form of mind control that lasts long after physical encounters. Turner also revealed the involvement of human military elements in this phenomenon. Many abductees report surveillance and harassment by human agents, including helicopter tails and direct military intervention. Turner's husband was abducted and interrogated by a military group in 1988, an event that disturbed her more than the alien encounters themselves. In her book Taken, she documented 4 additional cases of women whose lives were interfered with by military forces, not just extraterrestrials. Although she could not share all the evidence due to confidentiality, she had documented names, dates, locations, and military bases. This collaboration between non-human entities and human military elements suggests a coordinated agenda that goes beyond the simple phenomenon of extraterrestrial contact, pointing toward broader control over humanity. Turner's final revelation about extraterrestrial interest in the human soul raises fundamental questions about our existence and destiny as a species. If these entities can truly capture, recycle, and transfer human souls between different bodies, then we are facing something that goes beyond any known physical threat. The combination of body cloning, consciousness manipulation, psychological programming, and military collaboration suggests a plan for total control over humanity, not only on a physical level, but also on a spiritual level. For her, the real danger lay not only in the ships that floated silently in the sky, nor in the implants inserted into bodies without consent. No, what was most terrifying was the level of psychic control to which the victims were subjected. These entities not only took over bodies, they took over minds, redesigned memories, implanted ideas, molded emotions, and reprogrammed beliefs. They turned their victims into believers. They were worshippers without their knowledge. They used spirituality, the most subtle weapon, as a tool of subjugation. They presented themselves as gods, as angels, as masters of wisdom, but they were programmers, engineers of human consciousness. And Karla Turner shouted it to the world, even when the price was her prestige, her health, and her safety, because she knew that the greatest mistake of our species is not fear of the unknown, but naivety in the face of what is presented as light. Karla Turner not only warned, she denounced, she went beyond simple scientific observation or personal testimony. She raised a clear, direct, dangerous accusation. Behind the apparent narrative of a cosmic contact of spiritual enlightenment and galactic missions lies a covert agenda, a carefully designed plan to keep humanity uninformed, divided, and anesthetized. She claimed that the phenomenon of abductions and many supposed spiritual experiences with beings of light were actually part of a sophisticated control system. One that operates from the shadows under the illusion of free will and that manipulates the deepest human emotions: love, faith, fear, hope. And she warned that if the silence was not broken, that wall of discredit, ridicule, and terror that surrounds those who dare to speak, the dominion of these entities would only deepen, becoming more subtle, more invisible, more irreversible. For Karla, the concept of awakening was not a spiritual metaphor or an esoteric fad. It was an urgent call, an alarm, an act of resistance. Awakening for her meant beginning to see the reality hidden behind appearances and recognizing that we are being intervened by intelligences that operate beyond the visible, but no less real for that. And it was precisely when her voice began to resonate louder, when her books circulated in alternative circles, when conferences were filled, when they began to bother those who preferred that the veil not be lifted, that something happened. In 1995, Karla received a devastating diagnosis: advanced breast cancer, a sudden, unexpected blow, inexplicable in its speed. Her health deteriorated in a disconcerting way, as if time itself had accelerated to silence her, as if someone or something could not allow her to continue talking. On January 9, 1996, at the age of 48, Karla Turner left this world. Officially, it was a natural death, but for many researchers of the UFO phenomenon, especially those familiar with the patterns surrounding whistleblowers and key witnesses, her departure is surrounded by an aura of suspicion. Too fast, too timely, too convenient. She was silenced. Her illness was induced, as some theorists claim, by unknown technologies capable of altering the human body from the inside, or was it simply a deadly coincidence like so many others? The question remains open and up in the air. The echo of her warning still resonates today. If we do not face the truth now, we may not have another chance. The truth is that Karla Turner passed away young, but she left behind an uncomfortable and necessary legacy, that of a woman who not only investigated the invisible, but had the courage to confront it and denounce it even knowing the consequences. And now that she can no longer speak, her story becomes more urgent than ever. Despite her premature death, Karla Turner enjoys deep respect and recognition among the community of abduction researchers around the world. Her work has marked a before and after, consolidating her as a key figure in modern ufology. Her influence transcended the pages of her books and was present at conferences and specialized meetings, including prominent events such as those organized by MFON, where her ideas and testimonies continue to be essential references. To this day, researchers who delve into the phenomenon of paranormal abductions cite her work as a fundamental pillar for understanding the complexity and scope of these experiences. Karla Turner not only opened a door to the occult, but she also planted the seed for new generations to continue investigating, reporting, and seeking answers in the dark and mysterious terrain where science, spirituality, and extraterrestrials converge. brave, lucid, and ahead of her time. Your voice was uncomfortable, your truth shook, and your legacy continues to illuminate the darkest corners of the phenomenon. Where others were silent, you spoke. Where others feared, you investigated. Thank you for paving the way for us and for reminding us that not everything that glitters comes from the light. And so, as you may have noticed, the story of Dr. Karla Turner is not just that of one more researcher or victim. It is the story of someone who dared to look behind the veil, to face the invisible, to challenge the forces that Pocket dares to even mention. She left us with a warning that is still relevant today, a call to awaken from our lethargy and open our eyes to a reality that is much darker and deeper than most imagine. But be careful, because in that awakening there may also be danger. Not everyone wants the truth to come to light. Not all those who come in the name of light are truly what they seem. And while you look up seeking answers in the stars, remember that perhaps the real enemy is much closer than you think, within you and around you.
Let's talk about what I call VRST, Virtual Reality Scenario Technology. Let's talk about VRST in the experiencer / contactee / abductee phenomenon. All right. What we have is a problem is that a lot of times we have beings from a type 1 or type 2 civilization that are exposing us to this holographic projectors, hypnotic suggestion, and virtual reality scenario technology. They're showing up as sometimes dead husbands, dead relatives during the abductee phenomenon, okay, or seeing people you might know, or even showing up as religious figures you're seeing on these ships. That's very common. So that's part of this abduction experiencer phenomenon, is the VRST that isn't addressed or not. Somebody that kind of led me to this was Dr. Karla Turner. All right, she dealt with a lot on that in her books that you just saw. Fringe is one, Masquerading Angels, and Taken. They all kind of deal with this virtual reality scenario aspect. All right, so I advise anybody to kind of check that out. What I wanted to do is kind of tie this together with one of my own personal experiences, all right, which would be my second physical experience involving what I call adult onset experiences involving missing time, all right. This would be the second time this happened in my adult years. Somebody else was with me. They too was missing the time, and it was very much disconcerting. Anyway, what I wanted to do, so I wanted to find out, had I personally ever been exposed to VRST? I felt that I had, but I wanted to know the origin of it and what exactly it was. So I went and actually got a hypnotic regression done, specifically to see if I'd had any type of a government action or any type of thing I was unaware of, or any screen memories that was produced by this virtual reality scenario technology. And what came out of it was actually my second experience concerning missing time in adult years. All right, and what we're going to do is go over a couple of pictures illustrated by Christine Dennett, who's been very good to me. All right, and we're going to go over the aspects of this one experience and tie it into the virtual reality scenario technology aspect of the UFO experience, contactee experience. Thank you. Greetings. All right, first of all, I want to make this clear. I didn't mention before, this was a pure conscious craft, is what you would call this. All right, when I first had gotten, after this ship followed us out to the spot we were at, and then we started kind of phasing out there, the ship kind of seemed to materialize around us, is what it used to kind of take us on board. But the first thing I was exposed to, all right, this is supposed to be me, done by Kasara once again. This, as they called it, was a synaptic helmet, all right, and this is supposed to be me. There was a separate apparatus that was a type of a breathing module that came from a different place, and that's to help, because I've described before the mist in there and how hard it is to breathe, okay? And reality, maybe these nodules were a little bigger. There was only a few of them, but nonetheless, it was too big for my head, and they had told me that this was a synaptic helmet that would give me a frame of reference for communication during this encounter. And I know why they said that, because a lot of these rooms appear to be moving around me, okay? And you're materializing into rooms, and it makes you very, very sick, okay? So this is, they also immediately told me that this same technique had been corrupted by dark forces. So once again, this is the synaptic helmet, which aided me in having communication during this experience on board a pure conscious craft. All right, I think that describes it fairly well. There's another picture that I'm going to show with my friend Peter Maxwell Slattery. I had showed this for the first time at the Ascetti Ranch during my presentation. And actually Peter did a workshop later in Yelm about a few days later and came in contact with a quiche device, a plasma device that has a similar configuration to this. It really blew us away, and I'll show a picture of that also at the beginning. You've already seen that. So thank you very much. Okay, this one is the same experience, all right? This is the same craft, and what I call this is kind of a control room, or perhaps a bridge, all right? It was very hard to even begin to describe this for Christine to illustrate, all right? Excuse me. In this room, there was a type of a beam that went from the ground to the top, all right? Kind of crystalline in a way, and there were what I would call micro wormholes, all right, everywhere in this room. There was probably 30 of them, and they were unstable. These micro wormholes are opening and closing within just probably a couple of seconds of each other, but they're popping up everywhere in this room. During this time, I have a being, an entity jumps in my field of awareness onto the floor, and when it jumps onto the floor here, at first it looks like a more spherical light, plasma maybe, and then it starts unfolding, all right, into a pattern that looked quite similar to a sunflower. Then it jumped up and went into one of these micro wormholes and then materialized back out of another one within seconds, all right? And this is a system here where I think they're going to our dimension and then coming back. They're like fish out of water outside of these ships, some of them, because these are beings that have a completely different configuration to house their awareness, to house their consciousness. It comes down to what all types of containers do we have for consciousness. So this is the bridge, I would call it, control room. It's just not the way we would think of it. Many micro wormholes jumping all around, some weird symbols kind of materializing at times. So this is this control room of this pure consciousness ship. Thank you. Okay, this is the third room I was in on board this pure consciousness craft. Now, I've shown this picture one other time, all right? This room seemed more organic in nature. You had stalagmites coming down, all right, which were a little more even organic, and attached to those were these honeycomb-looking figures or configurations that were actually morphing, which is kind of hard for her to show here. But these were morphing, and you see the golden energy. I want to comment on this again, as I've shown you an engine on another video here that has the same golden energy that it's generating, okay? Even the honeycomb structure. All right, this is the third room on board this pure conscious craft. I've shown this sketch one other time, all right? It was organic. This room was organic. It appeared to be like a cave that had stalagmites coming down, okay? And on the end of those were these golden honeycomb-looking structures. You'll recognize this again. I've shown this structure before on another video concerning an engine, all right? The gyrospheric engine, all right? This golden ball, they were kind of morphing, all right? It's hard for her to kind of show that, but they were morphing, and this is called AGLE, Angelic Golden Liquid Energy. That's what they call it, the living light, all right? These honeycombs would start kind of moving and morphing, and then there'd be like a band of light around them, and what emerged from them, would be one of these light beings in a form that's almost humanoid. And to be quite honest, these look to me a lot like the beings on the movie Cocoon. How they kind of, when they dropped their skin, they were light beings. Okay, so this is once again on this pure conscious ship. I kind of materialized into this room, makes you very sick, very hard to breathe in there, despite the contraption of a synaptic helmet I was given, which was no longer on me when I went to other rooms, all right? So once again, this is like this cave on board. It's organic on board this pure conscious craft. Thank you. In conclusion, about virtual reality scenario technology, VRST, all right? We know that some of this technology has been back engineered by people, so that's being used to deceive people. A lot of the holographic principle, holographic projectors, that's being used against people in both the abduction scenario and in some possible big brother encounters, all right? So we want to kind of take that into account of the way people are being deceived with this technology, all right? And let's take it a step forward to the fact that we have many beings that are capable of projecting energy and projecting imagery into our minds, all right? That is the first way of mimicry. We talked about mimicry on another video, all right, about 2 months ago. This ties into virtual reality scenario technology, into the holographic principle, but that is also a spiritual gift that some beings have. Just like there's some of these beings you can encounter, and when you're not in face-to-face contact with them, it's hard to remember what they look like. You just know you were in the presence of some type of an entity. All right, so let's just take those things into account when we're talking about the abduction scenario, the experiencer scenario, the contactee scenario. Is virtual reality scenario technology. Thank you very much for listening and looking at the illustrations. I want to thank Christine Dennett for doing that, my friend PC here for being very patient and filming this for me. So God bless.